My name is Tara Bentley, and I'm the Executive Director of the Indiana Association of Home Educators, otherwise known as the IAHE.
Hi, my name is Amy Bragdon. I am a second-generation homeschooling mom of 3 who also works part-time outside the home and volunteers with the IAHE.
Together, we're your co-hosts for Season 3 of the Homeschool Indiana podcast. With each episode, we'll be here to support you on your homeschooling journey, sharing practical tips, important updates, and encouraging conversations to help you feel more confident and connected. And of course, we'll have some fun along the way. So grab your favorite drink, get comfy, and let's dive in. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the next episode of the Homeschool Indiana podcast. My name is Tara Bentley, and if you've been missing us, I hope you've been missing us. We've been on hiatus for a little while, and we are back today with a very important episode of the podcast, and we do try to, stay connected to here in Indiana, and sometimes other states seem far away, but this is important. So today I want to introduce you to a very special guest, Timothy Knotts. He is from Connecticut. He is on the board of directors there for their state organization. He can tell you more about that. He's also a lawyer and an author and a classical educator. So thank you, Timothy, for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me on, Tara.
Why don't you tell everybody just a little bit about your family and your life?
Sure. I'm a homeschooling father of 4. So my wife and I live near Hartford, Connecticut, and we have been educating our children at home since the beginning. We just graduated our oldest from our homeschool just last month. So that's very exciting.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, big steps and big changes in life for us and for her.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's been delightful. We didn't start off as very intentional homeschoolers. My wife kind of came to me when our daughter was 5 and said, I don't want to send her to kindergarten. And I said, okay. So it wasn't really until she was 6 or 7 that we started having those harder conversations about, well, no, we're making a very deliberate choice not to do school in the traditional public school way. And it wasn't too long before we said, no, this is what we're doing. And we intend to do it all the way through. So, and thus far, the Lord has been good. We've managed to do that.
That's awesome. And I know you're very active in the classical education space as an educator and author, I do believe. Yeah.
Yeah, a couple books out now, published through Classical Conversations Multimedia.
Okay. Well, awesome. So people can, again, we're in Indiana, so you may not have many people come knock on your door there in Connecticut, but they can look you up if they're a classical educator. Uh-huh. So I was reminded, so we're here in June of 2026, depending on when people are listening to this. And so you and I were actually at a conference together a little over a year ago, May of 2025. And I said to you at the time, hey, I should have you on our podcast so you can talk about this really difficult legislative session that you just survived. And we both kind of left and went, yeah, let's do it. And things go by. And so now you've been through even a tougher battle. And I'm just going to reference the subject line of the email that HSLDA sent out about it the day after the law was signed. And they referred to it as a dark day for homeschool freedom. And they're not wrong, and they're not overstating it at all. And so, as they said, this bill marks the first regression of homeschool freedom in the modern homeschool movement. And so you were there on the front lines, fighting, watching it happen. And so that's what we're going to talk about. And so why don't you tell everybody a little bit about what were the regulations? I know this bill hasn't completely gone into effect, but what are the regulations currently for homeschool families in your state?
Sure. So before the bill passed this spring, Connecticut had probably the oldest, I can't say that definitively, but probably the oldest statutory language in America that had to do with education. It predated Connecticut as a state all the way back into the 1600s. When it was just colony, and it specifically said that parents must educate or cause their children to be educated. And so this bill that we have now that just passed, it's now law, has stricken all of that language, all this language, 300 years of history done away with because of a progressive point of view of some things that we can talk about some more if we have time today.
Yeah.
But before that was the law. That was the law of the land. We didn't have any other language in the statutes or in regulations that defined or delineated what other things that were involved with homeschooling. So we did not have a registration requirement or an equivalent instruction requirement or portfolio review. All of those things were part of what was originally in this package of legislation. Thankfully, with long conversations and some lobbying by homeschoolers on their own behalf, and the disapproval really of the public school system, a lot of those things were stripped out of the bill. And so now this new statutory framework that's going into place it does require annual registration. It requires it under a variety of circumstances. So mostly it begins when children age into the school system, so at age 5. But there are various other circumstances under which you also would fall into the net of registration. And once you have had to register one time, you have to register that child until they graduate out of your homeschool or until they enroll in a public school. And so that's sort of the first half of the bill. The second half of the bill is even more troubling and problematic legally and philosophically. It requires that any student who's going to be withdrawn from the public school, the withdrawing party, guardian, parent, whatever it is, has to file a request to withdraw with the public school. We don't know exactly what will be on that request form yet because the legislature delegated that to the Department of Education to develop it. But we do know that it will include having to disclose every person who lives in the home who is 18 years of age or older, at which point the school district will run a check with the Department of Children and Families to see if anyone who is 18 or older living in the home is either on the state central registry for child abuse or neglect or is the subject of an open investigation by the Department of Children and Families. I want to be clear that the Department of Children and Families is the one who maintains this database. The vast majority of the people who are listed on that database have had no day in court. They've been put on there by a social worker at some point for some reason. And if that matter wasn't resolved, they just stay on that registry. So if I wanted to withdraw my children and my uncle, who's elderly, lives with me, and at some point in 1975, his neighbors complained that his kids were hooligans running around in the backyard unsupervised, and he got put onto that neglect registry back in 1975. He's still there today, and my children would not be allowed to be withdrawn from public school because Uncle Joe let his kids be a little feral one day in the backyard.
Well, yeah.
So
Right.
there's a huge problem there with communication between the schools and Department of Children and Families. There's federal law about who the schools can communicate information to about students. There's also the really giant issue of due process rights. There is no appeal as written in the bill. So if that situation were to come about where I was trying to withdraw and Uncle Joe was on the list, I am statutorily disallowed from withdrawing my children from school, and there's no appeal system for that. So I would have to take the system to court to try and get that overturned.
Wow. So how much of the bill that you saw this year was similar to last year? Was it the same target that they were putting on families?
Yeah, so it's really hard to say because last year they hit the ball. Last year they scheduled a very last minute informational meeting at the legislature where they invited a select few people to testify. They didn't take public testimony. They didn't invite our oldest statewide organization to be part of that testimony. And when someone did ask them about whether there was actual legislative language that was either written or being written, this was last May, they denied it. They said, no, we don't have anything in the works. Well, lo and behold, with some Freedom of Information requests, there were definitely some of them who were on that panel and some of their allies who indeed had been working on language very similar to this bill.
So I guess, so a couple things are running through my mind. And the first one being that when you have a state with such significant freedom for homeschool families, like Connecticut and like Indiana, it paints a target on us from the opposition. And so Indiana, always near the top of the list when it comes to homeschooling as a place to homeschool freedom. And we obviously fight for that. We treasure that. But we know that two things: it can lure people into a false sense of security. And I imagine that 250-year-old, 300-year-old statutes can also do that to a state. But it also just means that someone's always working to take that freedom away.
Yeah. That was one of the arguments that was bandied about a lot, both by the proponents of this bill and in the media. A lot was, well, Connecticut really, there's so few states that have no regulation of homeschoolers, so they use that as evidence of a lack rather than it being a good thing that other states should be
Right.
aspiring to. As of the end of last year, there were 12 states with no homeschool regulations, and now after this legislative session, it's 11. Although on the plus side, New Hampshire just went the other direction. New Hampshire just repealed all their homeschool regulations. So I guess maybe they're back to 12.
Maybe
Also,
we are back to 12,
yeah.
but still very difficult for you guys and your families. So what about, was this a partisan push? Or, I mean, I imagine Connecticut politics are very different than Indiana, but what did it look like?
Yeah. Probably many of your listeners are much more familiar with the Illinois situation
Yes.
next door there. But it's very similar. We live in a very blue state, lots of Democrats. We're one party control system. They have a supermajority in our legislature. There was bipartisan opposition to this bill. And not only did the Republicans vote against it uniformly, but some of the Democrat legislators also voted against it. But because there's a supermajority, they can afford to lose some of their own and not be unable to pass the law. Even there, it's not something that I would title a broadly supported Democrat position here in Connecticut. It was a select few. It's some people who were really very intent on getting this done and have been for some time, that have twisted arms and traded favors, manipulated the media, done a lot of hard work to get this bill to where it was. It's not the first time they've come trying to regulate homeschoolers by any stretch of the imagination, but it definitely has been a wave that's been cresting. And to be clear, these people, those who are at the center of this and were pushing for it, have also been very clear that they're not done. Like,
Right.
registration and this background check for withdrawing students is not the end game. This is the beginning of their program.
Right. And I'm not sure how much we'll get to today, but let's talk about, because I think that the partisan question, I really ask that because I don't want people, again, to fall into a false sense of security because of who we are, who our legislature is here in Indiana, because it does come from both sides.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the other, obviously, the puzzle piece here that is a national issue is the decreasing enrollment in public education, and how all legislatures are like, how do they fix that? So they've got schools, educators, teacher, that lobbying of that other side. Like, how do we fix it? They want to fix it. They want to keep enrollment coming because enrollment means numbers. And that is the excuse or the push, I think, for a lot of the legislation that we've seen over the past couple of years and that we're going to continue to see.
Yes. I mean, to be a little bit cynical for a moment, right? I mean, when it comes to public policy, the answer almost always is follow the money.
Right.
And education is giant money. It's big money for the schools. It's big money for towns. It's bread and butter, big money for the teachers' unions and others. And the teachers unions, the superintendents generally are very, very for increasing their purview. The more kids they have eyes on, the more they can come back to the legislature and ask for more funding. Yeah, declining enrollment's a big deal everywhere. It certainly is in Connecticut. And so the child safety angle was really the main lever that they were attempting to use to explain why this push. But when confronted with the fact that the final bill really has almost nothing to do with child safety, they sort of shrugged it off and went ahead and pushed it through anyway. And it's really very clear that it's about data. It's about tracking children. It's about trying to find ways to lure them back to the public system or force them back into the public system or keep them there as much and as long as they can.
Well, and we know that, and I'm saying this without having a study right in front of me, but we do know that there are studies that show that increasing the regulations on homeschool families does absolutely nothing to impact academic achievement or safety at all.
Yeah, absolutely true. I mean, they tried to use our neighbors because we live in the Northeast, which is a very high regulation area, generally speaking. But New York, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, all much higher on the regulatory scale than Indiana or Connecticut, certainly. And so, of course, they tried to use those as comps, which is interesting. Again, if you take it over to sort of a real estate analogy, that would be like picking out two or three of the worst houses in your neighborhood and using them as comps, or maybe if you're a realtor, using two or three of the most posh houses in the town and saying, well, there's our comps. Well, it's not a fair comparison to looking at the nationwide picture. And yeah, there's no evidence that New York or Massachusetts or Rhode Island have any lesser incidences of abuse or better academic outcomes at all.
Well, so I think that one of the things that, as you have shared, and we've referred to them, those people. And so, wow, I really hesitate, right, to name names to those who do fight against us. It's not an unknown. And so who is celebrating this regression in homeschool freedom?
Yeah. So, I mean, really, it's two, apart from, again, the teachers who have more of a financial interest on the philosophical side or the political side, really two kinds of people. There are people who are statists who really believe that our children belong to the state first and foremost, and that we get to keep them, educate them, raise them only as the state allows. And, that includes some academics like Elizabeth Bartholet up at Harvard, and some others who've pushed that position for quite a long time. And of course, it takes a village people.
Right.
Over the UN, there's some people who are all about that. So there is this undercurrent of academics and political people who are about that. And then there are some people who are really just directly policy-wise, directly on point pushing for these things. And that's really spearheaded by, though not limited to, the Coalition for Responsible Home Education, who have introduced a lot of legislatures and legislators around this country to their model legislation, to their pretty badly skewed, mostly anecdotal statistical evidence. And they've given them a lot of talking points, which we heard echoed in all of this process here in Connecticut. And again, we see them and hear them in places like New Jersey and Illinois, as other pieces of legislation are introduced there as well.
Right. And they absolutely were not only celebrating, but taking credit, truly.
Mm-hmm.
For this. So
yeah, they were invited to be part of this process in Connecticut. They're not working quietly behind the scenes. They're pretty openly involved in lobbying, in providing information, and being partners with the statist legislators.
So who was in the trenches with you? Who was fighting?
Yeah, we have a brand new HSLDA attorney up here in the Northeast, Ralph Rodriguez, and he was fantastic. He was at the legislature with us, sitting through hearings, attending. We had a 19-hour-long public hearing in the education committee up here. It started at 10 in the morning and ended at about 3 o'clock in the morning the next morning. And Ralph, they allegedly assigned the times randomly, and Ralph ended up at the very, very tail end. He was like in the last 5 or 10 people to testify. He sat through the entire hearing for that, which we're very appreciative of that. And at this point, HSLDA is looking at whether there's an avenue to take this to court, which we also are excited about. Although sad that we have to be reduced to going to court instead of being able to win this at the legislative level. So they've been a huge help. Many of our state sister organizations around the country have reached out with both prayers and offers of assistance. That's been great. And of course, the Alliance of Christian Homeschool Leaders has been really helpful too.
Wonderful. So when you look back, do you think it was a foregone conclusion of what this was going to look like at the end? You hate to think, I mean, you've been fighting this a long time. We know that they came with a strong playbook, but was there something that turned the tide?
We were fighting a defensive action the entire time. We know that the Democrats very rarely will call bills that they don't know that they have the votes to push through.
Mm-hmm.
They have a big agenda, and they don't like to waste time on things that they might not get past. So when it came up, we knew that it was going to be a real knockdown, drag out fight. We're thankful that we managed to pare it down to something that was less damaging and destructive for homeschoolers. But again, this is, I think, the fourth time in the last 10 years that anti-homeschooling legislation has been either introduced or been proposed, at least. So yeah, we fought it again and again and again. This year, with the political headwinds that we have as freedom-loving people in the Northeast, maybe not a foregone conclusion, but certainly it was kind of their year to win if they were going to be able to do it.
Wow. So I guess, my question was going to be, where do you go from here? I think you've shared that a little bit about HSLDA pursuing potential legal action. What else is still happening?
Yeah, so we're still trying to educate people on what this bill is. We're certainly trying to explain to people who have bought the argument that, oh, it's about child safety. We're trying to teach them about the fact that it's not really about child safety, and that it's not just homeschooling parents who should be worried, because this bill was coming after homeschooling parents, but the next bill might not just be the homeschoolers.
Right.
And it certainly might not be just registration. So, we're a 501c3. We're not a 501c4. We don't go up and actively lobby at the Capitol as an organization, but we definitely want to be continuing to help our constituency to be active in talking to their neighbors, and hopefully eventually to vote in people who will support parents and freedom, and not this sort of terrible encroachment on what our U.S. Supreme Court has titled a fundamental right.
Right. And, I'll immediately you sent bells off in my brain, because 501c3s can lobby. It's just not our purpose. And so your primary focus obviously is on your families and serving them. And that does include protecting them in some ways. It just is not your primary focus, but yeah.
Yeah. So we do. I mean, we go to the Capitol. We were there all through this session as leaders and as an organization, but our day-to-day, week-to-week mission is equipping the homeschooling families really to do that hard work for themselves.
And how many people are on your board?
We're an enormous group of 5 people on our state board right now.
I think I kind of knew the answer, but not really. But I mean, it and all volunteers, correct?
Yes.
And so that is still the majority of homeschool state organizations, definitely. And so we have a small board as well here in Indiana. We have a larger volunteer base, 1 employee, that's me, but it is all of these organizations, and this freedom, it is held together by people who are passionate and dedicated and want to serve and help protect this freedom, which is so delicate, as you know. And yes, we need our friends at HSLDA, but the volunteer spirit is what has held the homeschool community together now for decades.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the legislators will listen with half an ear to state organizations and to HSLDA, because they do matter, but they listen most attentively to the people. When hundreds and thousands of people call and show up, that's the loudest message. Sadly, this year, despite thousands of testimonies, 98% of which were against the bill, the Democrat leadership here decided to push forward what was obviously against the public will, but was what they had every intent of doing one way or the other.
Well, I mean, I don't want to leave here disheartened. I feel a little bit of it, but I know that for you, this really has spurred you on to do something kind of big in reaction to all of this. So you are running for office.
Yes. So my incumbent senator is or was until the end of the session, the chair of the Education Committee on the Senate side. And so he was the proponent of this bill.
Wow.
And so as the bill was coming to a head and clearly headed for a vote, I called my local Republican town committee and said, who can I support to run against him? Like, where can I go to make some phone calls or to give some money to support a campaign? And they said, well, do you want to run? I said, so what you're saying is no one is running? And they said, well, we don't have anyone right now. And that was only several weeks before the endorsement conventions were happening.
Wow.
And I said, well, I can't stand up in front of my homeschool friends and in front of my children and say, well, it's inconvenient. It's not good time. It's a hard thing. And I'm probably not going to win. And so I can't run and just let him unopposed come back into office. So yes, I'm running for state Senate against the proponent of this bill.
Wow. Well, I just think it's amazing that you are teaching your children exactly, what you stand for, and definitely will be watching and supporting you from here in Indiana. I think that's amazing. I think that because you could walk away from this fight one of two ways, right? Like completely beaten down and go home and cry in the closet, which maybe you had that moment. I don't know. Maybe that would just be my reaction. Or you can decide to jump in and get in the fight and try to change things. And so
Yeah.
good. Good for
Yeah,
you.
there's at least 8 or 10 candidates across the state of Connecticut this election cycle that are now in the fight because of the homeschooling bill.
Wow.
And so I don't know how many of us will win, but at the very least, I hope that it sends a very clear message that you can't walk on the homeschoolers and expect it to be a free pass.
Right. Well, as we wrap up here, I guess, you've given us a lot to think about, hopefully, and people can be mindful, not be complacent. Give you the final word. What is the thing that you want other homeschool organizations, other homeschool communities to know going forward?
Yeah, I think you already said it, Tara, is complacency is not something you can rely on right now. They came for us this year. They've got a hit list. They'll be knocking on doors, and whether that's a majority of the doors in your state or not, they get the right person, the right bill sponsor, the right administrator in their pocket, and it's just a matter of time.
Right. Well, thank you so much for spending today with me. And I know I will see you later this year, hopefully, but I look forward to seeing you work hard to serve the families of Connecticut. And I know you do that no matter what, whether you win this election or not, you are working to serve Connecticut families and all of us when you stand up against things like this. So I
Yes.
appreciate you and thank you for sharing with our
Yeah.
people.
Thanks, Tara, and I'm praying for you in Indiana as you fight the good fight there too.
Thank you.